Hi everyone, today I thought I would share 3 dinners that I made this week. Maybe if you're in a cooking rut like I often get into, this will give you some inspiration to get out of it. These 3 meals are all super delicious, creative, full of flavor, basically everything that you would want a vegan meal to be. For me, it's really important to keep my meals like super full of flavor and amazing textures and exciting. Otherwise, I would get really bored of my diet. I think a lot of non-vegans, they just can't wrap their minds around what vegans actually eat. And I think a lot of people, when they think about going vegan, they just think about the meals that they currently eat. And then they just think about those meals without the meat and without the dairy. And they think that that's what they would have to eat if they were vegan. And so I think a lot of people think that it would feel really limiting and restrictive when really, we all know as vegans, there are so many different creative things you can do with plants. I also think a lot of people think that vegans literally just eat vegetables. Like, as ridiculous as that sounds, I've seen people comment that. I wanted to kind of dispel a few of those myths with this video, and let's get started. The first meal I'm going to make is a giant vegan meatball. This meal just makes me so happy. Last year for Valentine's Day, I was looking for some kind of delicious Italian meal, and the idea of this giant meatball popped into my head. It's really funny because I at one point posted a story of an Olive Garden commercial in which there was a giant meatball.
And behold, our biggest meatball ever.
That is disgusting.
And now, a few years later, and I am craving a giant meatball. I still think the Olive Garden one looked gross though. I looked up some vegan meatball recipes and I came across this recipe. This is from Minimalist Baker, so this is not my own recipe. I love that they're gluten-free, they don't have mushroom, they're quinoa and black bean based, so super high in protein, and it's just a really fun meal for me. I get so much joy out of this giant meatball. So first of all, I'm gonna preheat my oven to 350. The first step that you do is getting the black beans dried out. Basically just straining the beans, drying them off, and then we put them in the oven at 350 until they're just a little bit dry and cracked. And then I also get my quinoa started first thing because basically we need the quinoa to fully cook and then fully cool off before we use it. So then I'm chopping up my garlic. Now this recipe calls for garlic and shallots, but unfortunately I didn't have any shallots. I forgot to get them at the store. So instead of using 2 cloves of garlic that it recommends, I used like 6 cloves of garlic. So I just increased my garlic. Now this recipe calls for a bunch of different spices that get added in different steps, so I like to pre-separate the spices ahead of time. And then in this recipe, fennel seeds are optional. Now I used to hate fennel because I really hate licoricey flavors, but lately I've been really appreciating it as a flavor in Italian cooking, and I am just getting my oregano in here as well as my tomato paste. Just getting these in little dishes so that when I'm ready, they are ready to add. My quinoa is cooked, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that in the fridge so that it can cool off. Now I'm just sauteing my garlic and would be sauteing my shallots with that if I had followed the recipe correctly. And the beans looked pretty much done to me. They're kind of dry and cracked, so I'm gonna move on to the next step, which is putting a bunch of the ingredients in the blender. So the garlic, the black beans, some of these spices, and then just pulsing it into a kind of a loose meal. It says don't overmix, so this is what it looked like. Honestly, this would be way, way, way easier with a food processor. I wish I had one. I might be getting one at some point, but it is a little harder with the blender. I'm also going to be making broccoli rabe with this meal. Last winter, I got reacquainted with broccoli rabe, and it is probably my favorite vegetable now. I just love the taste so much. Can't really think of anything more delicious. There's different ways you can cook broccoli rabe. You can saute it, but I am kind of going for a little bit of an easier, less fussy method, which is just to kind of just cut it all up into small pieces and then put it on some baking trays, and then I'm just gonna end up baking this. It'll get cooked, but it's not something I have to like actively think about. So my quinoa's cooled, I'm adding it to my blender along with the rest of my ingredients, and now I am pulsing it to kind of form the meatball dough. I did have to stop quite often to mix it up. So eventually it came out looking like this, and I'm happy with that. I could have pulsed it so that the beans were a little more blended and whatnot, but I thought it looked fine. So I'm just gonna put it all into a bowl, and I just was mixing it up a little more. So now I am taking my dough and I'm cutting it in half and then just forming it into my 2 giant meatballs. In the original recipe, I think she tells you to cook them on the stove first and then put them in the oven. That just was way too many steps for me. So I am just putting them on a baking tray, glazing them with some olive oil, and then I'm just putting them in the oven at 375, and I also put my broccoli rabe in there. I love making my own tomato sauce. I just think it's so much better than store-bought. This isn't like a super homemade tomato sauce, it's more like a semi-homemade. I just take a can of diced tomatoes, add in some salt and a little bit of these Italian spices, and I just blend it until it's the consistency I want. It just tastes so fresh and delicious this way, and it does end up being cheaper than buying jars of sauce. So now I'm getting my pasta cooking. I am using capellini or angel hair. It's my favorite pasta to use for this. And once that's cooked, adding it to my bowls, topping it with my sauce, and then the broccoli rabe, and then finally the meatballs. This just gives me so much joy, these giant meatballs. They just make me laugh. I'm topping it with a little bit of cheese as well and some fresh basil. You can of course do sauce on top of the meatball, but I sort of like having it kind of like presented at the top. And here is how they came out. And I'll just show you kind of what it looks like on the inside. I mean, how good does that look? Just the textures, the flavors. This was so good. This is one of my top dinners, I would say. And again, thank you Minimalist Baker for the recipe. It's definitely a keeper. So this next meal is sort of a crispy tofu and vegetable dish with a really delicious sauce. It's gingery, it's garlicky, it's got a lot of umami flavor in it, and hopefully you'll love it. So first up, I'm preheating my oven to 375. I have my tofu kind of wrapped up and with some books on top of it to squeeze out some of the water. I don't need it to be completely squeezed out. And then I'm breaking the tofu up by hand. This is extra firm tofu, by the way. I used to always cut it into cubes, but lately I've just been really liking the texture when it's broken by hand. I don't know, I just like the kind of uneven texture. I think it comes out better that way, and it is more realistically like chicken-like, I would say, if that's what you're going for. And then I'm taking a big container, putting cornstarch in it, and then adding all of my tofu pieces, and then just giving it a good shake to evenly distribute the cornstarch. A lot of recipes have you do this process in different ways. This is just what I have found to be the easiest, the most effective, and make the least amount of mess. So now I'm taking some sesame oil and I'm going to drizzle it over a pan that's lined with a silicone baking sheet, and I'm just brushing out the oil so that it's kind of evenly covering the whole surface area of the pan. And then I'm just putting all of my tofu right on here. I'm trying to make it so that they're not touching each other because it's kind of a pain when they get stuck together, but some of them will get stuck together. That's fine, you can always break them apart later. And just putting those in the oven. So at this point I'm going to get my rice started. I'm doing a cup of rice and like 2.5 cups of water. Basically bring it to a boil. Stir it up to make sure the rice doesn't get stuck to the bottom, and then kind of loosely cover it and simmer it for a while until most of the water is absorbed, and then I turn the heat completely off, put the lid on, and just let it sit until I'm ready to use it, basically. I thought I bought broccoli, but it turns out that I bought Romanesco, which I had forgotten about. I've never cooked with Romanesco before, so it was a little thrown off when I pulled it out of the fridge because like, oh shoot, I thought I had broccoli. But I decided to use it anyway. Cannot get over how beautiful this vegetable is. I noticed it was much, much harder than broccoli. Definitely more like cauliflower, but honestly maybe even a little harder than cauliflower. And I decided to just steam it, so I put it in my Always Pan steamer basket and just went ahead and steamed it in there. And now I'm cutting up my garlic. I'm using 2 big cloves, and then also peeling and cutting up some ginger. Again, these amounts are really up to you. Paul and I really love ginger and garlic, so I'm using, I don't know, kind of a lot, I would say. And then I'm also going to peel a carrot and just make a bunch of little carrot ribbons because I'll add these in later, just to give it a little bit extra texture and a little bit extra, you know, nutrition and variety of veggies. Got my Romanesco steaming. It did take quite a while to steam, and even at the end I think I could have steamed it a little more. So now I'm going to go over all the ingredients I'm going to be using for my sauce. First up, white wine vinegar. I actually prefer red wine vinegar, but I didn't have any. Tamari, so you could use tamari or soy sauce, depending what you like better. Rice vinegar, mirin, which is just a superstar ingredient in my opinion. This hoi fong chili garlic sauce. You can use any kind of spicy sauce or hot sauce. I usually do some maple syrup, but I didn't have any, so I'm using this bee-free honey, which is an apple honey. So when my tofu pieces are getting pretty crispy, I take it out and flip them all over just so that both sides can have a chance to crisp up. Just flipping them all over, breaking up any pieces that stuck together and putting them back in the oven. So now I'm ready to start cooking my sauce. I'm just throwing all the ingredients right into my pan, not measuring. I eyeball this. It's really up to you. I end up adjusting the ingredients a lot while it's cooking. Also gonna add a bunch of water because we want it to cook down a lot, and just kind of keeping an eye on it, stirring constantly. It's at like medium to low heat. And so when the sauce has kind of thickened a bit and it feels like the ginger and garlic have really cooked and it's at the consistency that you want, then you're just gonna go ahead and add in your tofu, give it a stir. I don't always mix the vegetables in, but I wanted to do that tonight. So mixing in the Romanesco and the carrot ribbons. The carrot ribbons are more just like a garnish. They're not actually being cooked. And putting some rice in my bowls, my tofu veggie mix, and then topping them with sesame seeds. And I love topping mine with chopped peanuts. I just love the texture that it gives and the flavor. And here is how they came out. I gotta say, I think this was one of the best tofu textures that I've ever had. It just came out really well for some reason. Crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside. It was delicious. And for my third and final meal, I am going to be making these pesto shells with shiitake bacon and tomatoes. Cooked shiitake bacon in my last video, and I'm cooking it again. Preheating the oven to 375. I washed and stemmed my shiitakes, just cutting them into little strips. Again, I have a whole video on making this if you want to check that out. Drizzling them with some oil and salt and just mixing them together with my hand, laying them all out so that they're all pretty evenly distributed. Again, trying to make them not overlap, and going to put those in the oven. So I'm also taking some grape tomatoes and just cutting these up. I absolutely love grape tomatoes when they're like perfectly ripe. I find, unfortunately, so many restaurants that use them when they've gotten to the like mushy point, and nothing grosses me out more than that. So I'm gonna start building my pesto now. I'm using walnuts. You can really use any nut that you want. A lot of people use pine nuts. Don't have a big food processor, but I do have this little mini guy, which actually really comes in handy with stuff like this. I'm just kind of pre-grinding the walnuts because those are going to be the hardest to blend. And then I had a half a can of white beans left over from a lunch I had made, so I'm adding these in to give it just a little bit extra protein and fiber. You could add something like green peas in to, just increase the protein. It's one of those things where you can kind of like camouflage it or hide it in here. And then I got this basil from my parents' house when I was visiting them. Usually I'd use more than this, I would say, but I just kind of used as much as I could get. So just throwing those in there, and then I am squeezing some lemon, and I'm also putting some olive oil, some salt, pepper, some garlic powder. You can use a whole clove of garlic. If you do that, I recommend putting it in with the walnuts in the first step so it can blend up nicely, but I'm just using some garlic powder. And then I am just blending it again, stopping to push the stuff around if I need to. I'm also gonna add a little bit of nutritional yeast just to give a little bit of that cheesy flavor. You can also add a vegan Parmesan to this. And then I'm also adding in some baby spinach. So talk about being able to hide a veggie if that's your intention, because you don't taste it at all. It's just adding to the nutrition of the pesto, and it's also adding that nice green color that we need a little bit more of. Blending and then adjusting as I go. I added in a little bit more lemon, a little more olive oil, and just continuing to blend until it's at a taste and a consistency that I'm happy with. Here's how it looked, and I was happy. Pesto is really just, you can make it however you want, so don't feel like you have to follow a strict recipe. It's basically just like a basil, a nut, and really whatever else you want to add in. So I'm getting my pasta cooking now. I'm using shells. I really like using shells for something like this because I just love how the sauce gets in all the little shells. And then I am reserving a little bit of the pasta cooking water. This is just a good thing to do because you get a nice sort of like starchy water, and then you can add that to your sauce if you need a little extra liquid. Strain my shells, and then I'm just adding my water and my pesto to the pot. You don't want to expose it to too much heat because that will just like change the taste and the texture. So just mixing everything together, I added a little bit more salt, and they are done. So just plating it up into my bowls. I'm adding Follow Your Heart Parmesan to mine. Paul doesn't like that, so not adding it to his. Adding on my grape tomatoes and topping it with my shiitake bacon. They were absolutely delicious. Having the tomatoes and then the shiitake bacon, adding that just really amazing pop of flavor. Cannot stress to you how good shiitake bacon is. It's like so mind-blowing to me because if you don't know, I absolutely hate mushrooms. So for me to say that is shocking. So I hope you enjoyed these meals. Hope they give you some inspiration. I will drop the recipes in the description box. Give this video a thumbs up if it made your mouth water, and I'll see you next time. Bye.